Okay, so today I will be talking about Shadows of Self, which is book 2 in Mistborn Era 2, which is totally different from Era 1. I did a review for book 1, Alloy of Law. I'll link it somewhere. We're going to be talking about book 2 today. I will have brief spoiler-free thoughts, then we'll dip into spoilers, and then final thoughts. So if you don't want spoilers, use the timestamps in the description so you can skip over spoilers. I'm actually not going to give a general description of what book 2 is, because even knowing who the major players of book 2 are kind of gives away too much about who's going to rise up in book 1. So I'll not do that. All I'll say is that I really enjoyed this. The things that I loved about book 1 continue in book 2, and then the things that kind of made me like book 1 but not love it, those things, a lot of them have grown for me a lot. I guess I'll be more specific. The friendship between the main two characters, Wax and Wayne, excellent. I love their dynamic. I love the way they play off of each other. I love how different they are. The deepening of the magic system, the way action is done in this story, and the general so Era 2 is it's its own thing completely. I think it's 500 years in the future from Era 1. And so a lot has changed in society, and what we know, the people that we know from book 1 and the world that, not book 1, from Era 1 and the world that we know from Era 1 is now history. And these are historical figures and historical events. And so there's a lot of reference to Era 1 while it's something that we know and we experience, but it's something far off in the past to them, which adds such an interesting dynamic to the world building of Era 2. Plus, I may have already said this, the deepening of the magic system and the way it's used in this new setting and this new timeline is so fascinating to me. The main thing that made book 1 a like and not a love for me was that I'm a very character-focused reader. If I'm reading a story, I'm reading it for characters, for the most part. And Sanderson is an author that I feel writes characters fantastically. And I felt that book 1, Alloy of Law, was far more plot-focused, and the characters, I didn't feel a lot of depth from most of them. While Shadows of Self is I still don't get the depth out of these characters in Shadows of Self that I do from like Era 1 and the Stormlight Archive. I still don't get the kind of depth that I'm used to from Sanderson. These characters are deepening, and it made me so happy. With the general story, book 1 was a lot more lighthearted, happy, a lot more self-contained, even though we did pull a lot from Era 1 as far as like the history and the setting and and the magic and everything. It was a lot more self-contained. It was a lot more upbeat. It was a lot more quick and fun, whereas book 2 I think is a lot more of what I expect from Sanderson, where it's much slower. It's very political focused. There's much more deepening of the world and reaching out from what we already know of the world and the Cosmere. A lot of setup. I expect book 3 to have a lot of Cosmere references in Era 2. And that's a lot more of what I expect from Sanderson, and it was a lot more comfortable for me personally, especially because I've come to love these characters a lot more. So I was a lot more invested in the plot that was happening. Plus, there's one specific thing that comes back around in this that was one of my favorite things of Era 1. So I really loved that. And I really liked the antagonist in this book too, which, you know, several of my friends have mentioned not liking the antagonist in book 2, but I thought it was great. Anyway, I'm gonna dip into spoilers now, and that'll probably be the majority of this video. So if you want my final thoughts, if you haven't read it yet and you just wanted to get a general idea of if I like book 2 better than book 1, the answer is yes, I did. A lot of people don't though. So I don't know what to tell you as far as what to expect, but if you have a similar reading taste to me, I liked book 2 so much more. So skip to final thoughts. Down in the description, there's a timestamp if you want my final thoughts. But if you're here for spoilers, this is probably where I'm gonna stay for a minute. So I actually, if you can't tell already from how messy that spoiler-free part was, I finished reading this last night, and I like read the last pages, talked about it a little bit on Discord, and then went to sleep. So I have had no time to really think through my thoughts. This is going to be a very unprepared, unthought out, just gush, but I really don't have very much negative to say about this book at all, so hopefully you won't mind. I think I'm just going to, if you're here, you've already read it, so I think I'm just going to flip through this book because I annotated it, look at some of my favorite scenes and favorite lines, and just hang out here and chat with you a little bit. It'll be a very unstructured, chatty sort of gush. And we're starting in the prologue because, my goodness, I enjoyed this prologue so much. So Wax is a character that I don't mind Wax at all. I like him, but he's not a character that I'm wowed by. He's not a character that I'm super attached to, although book 2, I got far more attached. I shouldn't bend this back in front of you. So sorry. I got way more attached to him in book 1. Starting from the very beginning with the prologue, first of all, I loved seeing him and Lessie interact more. One of the things that was really disappointing to me in book 1 is that we got just a couple of lines of Lessie, and then she died, and then the Wax's whole internal conflict and depth and inner conflict, everything really relied on his love for this character that I don't know even a little, which is a lot harder for me to attach to a character that way. So getting more of Lessie and getting to know her a little bit more, which I know we're in the spoiler section, I can just say that she's Bleeder, but we'll get there because I loved that too. Anyway, getting more of her was awesome. I love her. And then seeing Wax in this very young, raw, and naive way where he wants to be a big shot and he kind of is thought of as a big shot, but in reality he has no idea what he's doing, was so fun. Even just little lines like this. "I'm a lawman," Waxillium said. "I do what I do in the name of justice." The barkeep blinked, slowly, deliberately, as if it required conscious effort. "So you'll pay?" "Yes, I'll pay," Waxillium said with a sigh. Him just like coming in, ready to be the law, the charming, competent lawman, and then he arrives in the roughs and it's just a very different thing. His introduction with Leslie where he says, "Waxillium Landrian, lawman for hire." And she says, "You're kidding. That's how you introduce yourself?" "Sure, why not?" Every sentence out of his mouth, everything he does, she's so unimpressed with. And then when we find out, here it is, she keeps asking him, "How did you end up killing this person that you're known for?" And then she says, "Aw, hell, you caught him on the crapper, didn't you?" Waxillium grinned at her. "Yeah. Did you shoot him in the back too?" "As bravely as any man ever shot any other man in the back." It's just, that is such a brilliant line. I love the two of them together. I love Wax in this happy-go-lucky, very optimistic and ready for adventure and doe-eyed look on what his career as a lawman is gonna be. And then Leslie's much more experienced, "You've got to be kidding" kind of interactions with him are, I actually prefer this Wax, and don't get me wrong, I do like Wax, especially I got a lot more out of him in this book than I did in book 1, but I love this very untamed, doe-eyed Wax that we got in the prologue. It was lovely. Oh yeah, so from chapter 2, from the very beginning of this, we see Bloody Tan walking about, and I don't know why I didn't even consider that it would be a Kandra. I think if I read Era 1 more recently, that would... It's not that I don't think about the Kandras when I think about Era 1. TenSoon was my favorite character in the entire trilogy. So I think about Kandras, but for whatever reason, all my notes in this book, as Bloody Tan shows up and as Wax continually is startled and frightened and then brushes it off and says, it must have been my imagination, I must have been seeing things, it must have been the adrenaline, something like that. Each time, which he only does it like 3 times, but each time that he sees Bloody Tan and brushes it off immediately, each time my notes are saying, don't you know you're in a fantasy novel? Magic is real. If you see a dead person, believe it, don't brush it off. But that was so exciting for me, and I love that instantly from the very get-go, I'm interested in this new thing that's happening, and I love that it ended up being Kandras. I was much more interested in the general intrigue and mystery of the story as a whole because it surrounded Kandras so much, and I love Kandras and wanted to understand them so much more in Era 1, wanted a lot more of them, and wanted so much more of TenSoon in Book 3. So I was so happy when I realized that Kandras are at the heart of this book, and that blood... Bleeder is a Kandra, and oh gosh, how do you say her name? Milan? I'm flipping through to try to see the spelling again, but I'm pretty sure it's Milan. Milan is a Kandra, and TenSoon was referenced, and I was just like, I wanted so badly to know what happened to him and how he's doing, and I'm so happy that not only did I get that, but I actually got to hang out with him for a while, and that was so great for me. It was so fulfilling for me. So in Book 1, I really liked Wayne. I really liked Wayne for his humor and for his silly shenanigans, like his costume changes, trying to pick up accents, the way he can't steal anymore, so he trades, I think is all so brilliant, and I think that he's a really funny character. But I don't like some of the comments that he makes to women, and this isn't a shot at Sanderson. I want to make that very clear. Maybe I didn't make it clear enough in the first video. It's nothing against Sanderson. I just don't attach to that character type because as a woman online, I get to hear it. And I don't like reading about it either. It's never going to make me attach to a character, right? There's still some of that in this book, but I personally think it's less, so I was able to get past it a little bit more easily. And in Book 1, I felt that Wayne was the character that had the most depth of our entire character cast, and I still feel that way, which is really funny because I talked about this on the Discord that I really feel I like Wayne more than a couple of other characters, and most people were responding that they don't feel like Wayne has that much depth to him, and I just so disagree. I think that I got even more depth out of him in this book, and I think that he's the deepest character in the series so far. We still got a ton of really funny scenes with him, like this entire scene where he is talking, well, we had these scenes in Book 1 as well, but where he's talking to someone, and as he's talking to them, he's like, he's repeating back everything that this person is saying so that he can try to get the accent right, and then requesting, now, can you say something that starts with an H? I mean, just his general interactions are always hilarious to me. Almost always hilarious to me. Oh, and then you get really awesome scenes that show how skilled he... It's a mass market paperback. It's okay that I broke the spines. You get these awesome scenes where you see how skilled he is and how competent he is, and that this humor does not define him, like when I think it's Marcy talking here. It's at the top of the page, so I don't see the talker. No, thank you. Some of us have been trying to find a killer, not a meal. Oh, that. Wayne kicked at something beside him on the ground, hidden in the shadow of the steps. Yeah, took care of that for you. You took care of that, Wayne, the person at your feet. Rest, he's bleeding. Sure is, Wayne said. Not my fault at all, that. I did knock him upside the head, though. But then just in that very same scene, Wax says, I suspected, but Wayne needs space to try his methods. On account of being so incredible, Wayne said. And it continues, and he just keeps interrupting on account of him being unable to accept that I'm better at this sort of thing than him. And then directly followed by, which never happens, Wayne grinned and took a bite of his apple, hopping off the steps and walking beside Waxilium. Except that one time, and that other time. But those don't matter, on account of my getting hit in the head enough times that I can't remember them. So, like, we still have this excellent humor from him, but then I also feel like we got a lot of extra depth, which I will flip through and find. Okay. So the depth that I felt we got from him in book 1 is, of course, in his backstory and history with killing the man, and in the fact that he still sends money to his family and to his kids, that they hate him, and they write him all the time to tell him that they hate him. And not only does he accept it, but he feels he deserves it. And that's when we really get a properly serious moment from him. We get more of that in this book, when he's delivering the money in person, and one of the daughters says, I don't need you to bring it in person. I do, Wayne said quietly. They stood in silence, neither party moving. Wayne finally cleared his throat. How are your studies? Are you treated well here? Is there anything you need? She pulled out a photo of sorts of her father, forcing Wayne to look at it. She does this every time, and after she shows him the photograph, she forces him to tell her again what he's done. You know you aren't forgiven. I know. You will never be forgiven. I know. Then I'll take your bloody money. Someday, he hoped he might be able to look into the girl's eyes and see emotion. Hatred, maybe. Something other than that emptiness. Get out. Wayne ducked his head and left. I really appreciate the fact that he messed up, he sees it, he owns it, and he does everything he can to do right by these people that he harmed, while also accepting their pain and the way that they react to him. He's doing everything he can to make their lives an ounce better after what he's done. And you see in his physical demeanor, in his quieter tone, in the fact that he's not trying to play jokes. I mean, he's even trying to joke around at the end of the book, after Wax has to watch his wife die again. He's still trying to make jokes to lighten the mood. He goes serious after Wax kind of lets him know that that's not the right time, but he's always trying to combat things with humor. Never this. And man, I just think that speaks a lot to him. I think that adds so much to him. Oh yeah. When they're talking about the scene that I just went through, Wax says, it went poorly? And Wayne responds, same as always. It's strange. Most days I don't mind being me. Today I do. You can't tell me that character's not deep. You can't tell me that character is just the surface level comedic break. But then there's also this scene in particular I love so much, when Wayne is talking about, or rather Wax brings it up, I think, how Wayne used to collect bottles. Every single beer bottle he would drink, he would keep, or something like that, or every brand he would drink from. And Wayne actually admits that he did it just to annoy Wax, that at first he did it for fun, but then he got really tired of the bottles himself, but he kept doing it because of the reaction he got out of Wax. Then in the very same scene, Wayne is cheating at his tower stacking game, and Marasi says, Wayne, are you that concerned with impressing us? And Wax says, it wasn't about impressing anyone. The contest wasn't about how high the towers got. It was about if I'd spot what he did. He always cheats somehow. And then they talk about, cheating, and they go on with that. But the thing is, I think that shows me so much about who Wayne is. I think everything Wayne does... Okay, I love friendships, right? Obviously, I really love books that feature a strong, very, very devoted friendship between two people. And Wax And Wayne, their friendship, their loyalty, the way they love each other is something that I'm very drawn to. But then Wayne, particularly as the supporting character, as the secondary main character, is naturally generally going to be the one that is even more loyal, even more dedicated, that's serving Wax. And that is the role that I tend to really latch onto. I love that Wayne is constantly thinking of Wax in the way that he goes along with what Wax is doing, in the way he tries to pull Wax out of trying to be a civilized person, but pulling him back to what he actually loves, which is being a lawman for hire. The way he reminds him to check his pulse when he's being too cruel and too removed from emotions. And now this, how even in a down moment where he's being silly and while he's being quippy and trying to entertain, it's always about Wax. He's cheating because he always has Wax in the back of his mind. He wants to see if Wax can catch him. He does things to pick on him. I find it very fascinating that not only is he an extremely loyal and dedicated buddy, but that also even in these little moments in his day, Wayne is constantly, everything he does it with Wax in mind. And I find that so fascinating. I also find it fascinating his interactions with Reinette, how we actually in this book got to see him interacting with Reinette from Wayne's perspective. And we got to see the depth of his admiration for her. And I don't know, man, I just can't be convinced that he's a shallow character. I just can't be convinced of it. He still had some really gross lines in this, the way he spoke towards women, and I don't like those lines. But I like his character a lot. Sorry. I'm gonna move on from him soon. I just also really want to mention this scene with Bleeder. His interactions with Bleeder are interesting as a whole. They seem to get each other quite well. But this entire scene where he's talking about hats and how they're disguised for the brain, and she says, "Has anyone ever told you that you're surprisingly wise?" And he says, "All the bloody time." And she responds, "They're idiots. You're not wise. You're playing them. You're doing this on purpose." She grinned. I love it. And then they keep up this dialogue, but then when she's talking, she's revealing that the Kandra have a way of killing themselves, or allowing themselves to die. And we really get, again, a little glimpse into the depth of him when he's talking about death, and he's talking about how with immortality that it would seem so depressing because he can get through life knowing that there's light at the end of the tunnel. Death, knowing that there's an end, knowing that he just has to perform a little bit longer and then we'll get to the end. But knowing that there is no end, it would be horrible. And that's not a light discussion. That's not a light thing that he just said. That's not a light insight into his mind and into how he views life. Then he also explains how he exhibits how he really understands Bleeder, that she's just putting on another hat, putting on another costume, putting on another identity, living life that way to make life more interesting, to make life easier for how long she has to live it. And he says, that I can understand, that I respect. Even at the end, when she does give this information that the Kandras can allow themselves to die, can choose death, and he says, nice, that makes a lot of sense. Always have an escape planned. I don't know, I can't be convinced that he's a hollow character. I just can't, or a shallow character. Okay, I'm gonna move on from Wayne. I've actually already been talking way too long, so I'm going to pick up my speed and not spend 20 minutes on every little detail. Actually, I'm gonna stop flipping through this in general and just chat a little bit more. So, I really I enjoyed the general plot and exploring the world a little bit more. I enjoyed it a lot more in this book. Probably a lot of that has to do with the fact that I've already gone into a lot of Wayne, but with Wax as well, I feel like I got a lot more depth out of him, a lot more to attach to his personality. And I guess Marici's really the only character at this point that I'm still kind of feeling detached from. She still had some great scenes. She had some pretty interesting scenes with trying to solve the mystery. That whole scene where she was using her magic and she saved the governor's life by putting her and the attacker in a bubble. She definitely had some good moments, but for the most part, she's still just not a character that I find all that interesting, and I don't really find her perspectives all that interesting either. But other than that, Wax and Wayne both, I feel like I definitely understand better. I feel like they're getting enough attention and depth to have me interested. Then you still have characters like Steris and Renette, who are two characters that I love so much and do not get enough page time, and I desperately want more of both of them in book 3. Please, Sanderson, tell me you've done this for me. And then the new characters introduced. Milan isn't a character that I'm super attached to, but the fact that she's a Kandra, the fact that we got to know more about Kandras, and a lot of conversations that we had around her were interesting to me. Bleeder was a fascinating character to me. There were so many more characters that I was able to attach to a lot more in this book that made me much more interested. I guess as long as I'm interested in the characters that are driving the plot forward, I can be a lot more interested in the plot. If we have a really interesting plot, but the characters that are driving the plot aren't interesting to me, I'm not going to care that much about the plot. And so with book 1, I liked it, but I didn't love it. And with book 2, because now I'm attached to these characters that are moving the plot along, I feel like I'm able to really attach to the plot more. But also, the plot is very dependent on Kandras, which I'm just fascinated by as a whole. I thought that everything with Harmony, Sazed, was awesome. I really liked actually being able to interact with him in this book and talk to him and see his limitations. I found it fascinating that when we found out that Bleeder had taken one of her spikes out, we later find out taken 2 spikes and replaced. But that made it so that Sazed, so that Harmony can't actually see where Bleeder is. So Harmony can't even help in finding Bleeder, doesn't know a lot of Bleeder's motivations or thoughts or where the plot is going, which I think is an excellent idea for making it a lot harder for the characters to be able to execute what they need to execute in the story. Also, there's so many interesting little things that Sanderson did with the world. So admittedly, Sanderson loves his world building more than I do. And that's not an insult to Sanderson. It's just, it's me as a reader. I think that Sanderson is excellent at world building, and I love the way he builds worlds, but sometimes he builds them out further than I need him to. And I don't need the amount of exhaustive detail that he gives, and I don't need the amount of little intricate Cosmere connections that he gives. I know tons of people love them. It's more than I need. But in this book, it was just the right amount for me, especially these little things, like when Sazed explained that he loves people, he hates people's sufferings, so he's made life too easy for them now. But now we have this issue of the radio should have been invented years ago, and it's not, because people aren't pushing themselves for more because they're comfortable. I find that fascinating. That's such an interesting little piece of world building that we didn't need, but that we got, and it makes the world feel more authentic and deep and real. I loved the scene where Sazed tells Wax, I worked hard to get Marasi where she is. I did a lot to help her get here. And it's really annoying that you keep brushing her off and not listening to her as she's in this role. Please stop. I thought that was a great moment for Harmony, for Sazed. I don't know what I'm supposed to... He says it to me, but he's Harmony now. There's a lot that we got out of this plot as well, as far as, you know, them trying to protect the governor, eventually failing, and all that they jumped through to try to find Bleeder, to try to understand Bleeder a little bit more, that I thought was all really fascinating. And like I said in the spoiler-free section, there really wasn't a moment in this entire book that I was bored. There was no moment that I was like, can we get on with it, or anything like that. This level of political intrigue, expanding the world, expanding what we're doing here is, to me, it's the perfect level of Sanderson, and I just enjoyed every moment of it. Then when it all came to a head, and Sanderson's always great at his endings, but when it all came to you know, the Sanderlanche, and everything just started descending into chaos, was so much fun. But it hit so hard when we found out that all this time Bleeder was Lessie. Sorry, I always second guess myself when I say her name out loud because it sounds too much like Nessie and I think I must be saying it wrong, which I might be. But anyway, when we find out that she was Lessie the whole time, I cannot tell you how much I was not expecting that. And this is the brilliance of Sanderson. He hides things in plain sight. He gives you such blatant clues that are so easy to miss that when the reveals come and when we find out that this entire time we have never not known Bleeder. Bleeder has always been Lessie, even in the very first flashback we got in the first prologue. It's one of those things where it's like, I never saw it coming. I never even guessed it. I didn't even think about it once. But when the reveal happened, it made perfect sense. I can look back on the 2 books that I've read and I can say, yeah, they're there and there. I could have picked up on it. And I'm sure some people did. I could have picked up on it and I didn't. But I love when I get a major reveal like that is totally a shock to me. But I can look back and I can see where the seeds were laid. I can see where he put it there and it makes sense. It's not an out of left field thing. And the emotional impact of now twice Wax has killed his wife and had to watch her die. And he has to deal with the mental gymnastics of the fact that Harmony sent Bleeder to watch over Wax and that the whole time his wife has been a Kandra. And that she didn't die in the first place, but now she genuinely is dead. And both times it was by his hand. It's so much for this man to have to process. And the emotions that come from all of that is peak Sanderson. And then in the epilogue, we get all of the mystery and reminder of what's to come. Is there a new magic system that's about to be introduced? Certainly a new metal. We're about to expand a lot more. And there's a lot of hints that it's not just this, but that there's going to be a lot of Cosmere expansion coming in book 3, which I'm a little bit intimidated by because, as I just mentioned, Sanderson tends to love these things a little bit more than I do. And all of his tiny little Cosmere connections I think are interesting, but I don't thrive off of them. So when a book leans too heavily on world building and on these little connections, I don't like it as much. Like book 2 was so good for me and I want book 3 to be good too. I think I'm gonna still love it. I'm properly hooked on the series. It is interesting to me talking to my friends who have read this series because you know, the reviews, the thoughts on book 2 being better or worse and the series going uphill or downhill are so varied, it seems, that I don't know what to expect because I have friends that loved book 2 and friends that hated book 2, and I loved book 2. I'm really excited for book 3 and to see where that takes me. Anyway, so sorry for how incredibly long this was and unorganized this was, but final thoughts on book 2 are that it was excellent. I just said this, sorry, I should have said this in final thoughts. I have several friends who have read the series. Some people loved book 2, some people really didn't like book 2. It seems to be a pretty, at least within my friend group and on my Discord, it seems to be a pretty divisive book. So I don't know how anyone who's watching this spoiler free is gonna like it. I loved it. I thought it was definitely a step up from book 1. I thought the characters were deepened. I thought that the world was expanded. I really enjoyed so many elements of it, and I'm excited for book 3. Nervous, but excited. And I'm so excited that I'm reading this at a time where book 4 is going to be out soon, so I just get to read them all close together. It's awesome. But I really enjoyed this book. I'd love to continue discussing it with you in the comments. Do you like it? Do you not? Why? Make sure to do the spoiler space thing if you don't like it. I mean, not if you don't like it, if you're discussing spoilers, so that we don't spoil people who are here for the spoiler-free thoughts. I post videos every Tuesday through Friday. I'll see you guys again soon. Bye.